This podcast is sponsored by Go Play Sports, the brand new mobile app changing the game for grassroots. Whether it's Sunday League or five-a-side, Go Play Sports makes it easy to track attendance, manage teams and cut out the manual admin. No more endless group chats, no more chasing payments, just turn up and play. Go Play Sports. Download now from your app store.
Let's kick it off. I'm Steve and I'm joined by Ash and Ron and Daniel Khan from Sky Sports. You're the Manchester United reporter, Dan, so thank you very much for coming on. Really appreciate it. So I guess there's only one place to start in terms of where United are at the moment. Michael Carrick with his resurgence over the last 8 to 10 games. I know we had the draw against Bournemouth in our most recent game and now we've got a little break. So, you know, we're doing this podcast with no game to talk about, but there's still lots to talk about. So just give us your high-level view of where Manchester United are at the moment and how you feel, you know, the Carrick reign is going.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here. I think it's really interesting looking at Michael Carrick's reign so far because it obviously started incredibly against Manchester City and Arsenal. And you look at the Bournemouth game and even some of the games before that, and I think it's very interesting because I think there's a feeling of we don't want a repeat of what happened under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer in that first caretaker period where the performances dropped off at the end of that first season after he was given a permanent contract. So I was going into the Bournemouth game. I was at Old Trafford pitch side and I was kind of thinking, look, you know, off the back of maybe the last few results, I think Everton away and the Palace game, really, it'd be good to see an improvement in performances. You know, the results are great, but we need to maybe see better performances. But then I was at the Bournemouth game before the match and I thought, does that matter though? Because what team is playing well in the Premier League? Am I asking for something that's impossible? Because actually, forget Arsenal, forget Manchester City, forget Liverpool, even your Brightons and Bournemouths who play quite attractive football on a weekly basis. Like no one is playing that well really at this point in the season. And it's really interesting because you look at most games this season, and I was watching a lot of games that week, and especially players are shattered. I mean, even teams who are winning, you look at the final whistle, now you all go to games as well. They're all on their knees. I mean, United after that Bournemouth game, on their knees, you know, hands on their knees, hunched over. So, look, I think for Michael Carrick, he's done a really good job. I think he's had some easy wins as well, you know, off the back of Ruben Amorim, you know, going to the academy game, seeing the under-21s. I mean, I was there for his first game where he went to Lee, you know, and seeing his whole backroom staff there was really positive. So, look, he has made some really wise decisions as well. But also the team are at the moment very clinical, and that's what we've not seen probably over the last 2 years. Overall, I would say, you know, we're probably looking at an 8.5, 9 out of 10, I'd probably say.
It's a good rating. I want to come to Ron because Ron, you've not been on for a good few weeks. I don't think you've been on even since Carrick has taken charge. So Ron, tell me how you're feeling about Carrick.
Yeah, I mean, similar to Dan, really. I think the turnaround's just been remarkable, and we were just talking off air, weren't we, for a second, in terms of Ruben Amorim, and all of a sudden, wow, you know, what did we have, and look at what we have now. And you know, he should have probably gone sooner. It's just been chalk and cheese, really, hasn't it, in terms of the actual turnaround. But for me, the biggest thing I think is just gone back to basics. You know, he's playing the four at the back. And you know, he's playing players in the right position. Kobbie Mainoo is back in the team, deservedly so. Harry Maguire's playing well. So all those sort of key components to the squad, you know, which in the summer you'd think, okay, well, actually, these players aren't bad. They're good players. They just need that confidence. You've got to play players in the right position. Got Bruno Fernandes now playing in his favourite position in the 10. And all of a sudden, you know, things are looking up. So I don't think there's been a magic formula to it. I just think it's about simplicity, providing better confidence to the players. And you know, ultimately, it's about results. And as Dan, you've mentioned there, you know, 7 wins out of 10. It's been phenomenal. So long may it continue. I'll be interested to, I know we're going to talk about it later around Carrick and the future, but I'll be really interested, Dan, to hear from you in terms of what you think around the future and, you know, the managerial position post-summer.
Yeah, we'll definitely come on to that. Don't worry about that. Ash, just in terms of Carrick, so like, you know, we've obviously done the weekly pods, since Carrick came in, and, early part, obviously the performances, we were very happy with the performances. That Man City game, I think, some of the goals, I think, was it 5 goals we scored, like 3 or 4 disallowed, right?
Yeah.
So I know the narrative has kind of switched a little bit in the last 3 to 4 games because people are starting to question performances. But yeah, how are you seeing that?
Yeah, I think it was similar to what the boys have said, and also when we had Ian Irvin last week, in that I think expectations have risen week by week. Phenomenal performance against City, fantastic result against Arsenal, so that built the momentum. Then you had the Fulham win, and then it got to these games like Crystal Palace, maybe even Bournemouth, in terms of like, oh, there's an expectation, especially Newcastle away, and everyone thought would break the hoodoo and get the 5 wins. Forget about this haircut business and all the rest of it. And that's obviously the first defeat. I think, though, we've learned a bit about Carrick as well in terms of a personality. I liked the way he bit back at the reporter at St James's Park after that defeat, protecting the team. And I think the players appreciate that. As Dan would know, he was at the press conference every week, and Ruben would just say something which is just like, whether it's about Ruben's children and he equates them to the teammates and hating them one minute, loving them. Carrick's brought the calm. I think that's the main thing. And in terms of performances, we have struggled a little bit over the last few games, but like Dan said, it's like, who's actually playing well? Like, you look at the Carling Cup final last week, Arsenal top of the table, should win the league. Their players look absolutely gassed, as well as City played. Declan Rice has been, superb. It really struggled physically, and it's going to be like a good end to the season. Like, we got a good race. We're in pole position, so hopefully we can finish the job. But what about yourself, Steve? How are you feeling last few weeks, and the narrative around United and Carrick?
Yeah, I don't think anyone could have expected how well it went initially, especially, and then obviously, it's dropped off a little bit. But I think if you remain and have some perspective, you can look back and, like Ron said, 7 wins out of 10, like, you can't argue with that, especially where we were earlier this season and last season. So I think the $1 million question, right, is Michael Carrick going to get the perm job? So Dan, I'm not going to put you on the spot immediately.
You can do if you want. Easy.
I will, but I want to bring up a story that your colleague wrote. So Rob Dorset, I think it was last week, he put out a very interesting story that Manchester United are actually yet to speak to any other permanent candidates. So could you just tell us a little bit more? I'm sure you've spoken to Rob and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of correlates to everything I've been hearing on the ground at the club, and also Rob's own contacts as well. And I think that's what has been quite consistent, really, is Manchester United are always going to take their time in terms of really navigating this process and see who is available. I actually think they made the right decision to do that, because actually you move on, a few months, Thomas Tuchel has essentially ruled himself out with his contract extension. Carlo Ancelotti looks like he's doing the same in Brazil. And so actually, and similarly as well, let's not forget, 6 months ago, everyone was talking about someone like Oliver Glasner at Crystal Palace, which I would never have gone down that route anyway. And that's not just saying now because of Crystal Palace's kind of roller coaster of a season, but I never thought he would be the right fit for Manchester United. And I think that's proven to be the case at this moment in time anyway. So I think I think the hierarchy made the right decision, because actually by just doing nothing in one way of thinking, the situation has evolved itself, really. You've seen what Michael Carrick is capable of, but you've also seen actually what other options are out there. So, look, I think it's still the case that Manchester United haven't spoken to any other candidates. I think they're very happy with letting Michael Carrick see out the rest of the season before they maybe canvass who else is out there and before they speak to anyone else. And also, why would you? I mean, they're now focused on this little training camp next week in Dublin before they really focus on this last stage of the season. So it gives Michael Carrick, his backroom staff, the players, all of that clarity. I mean, I think they saw the repercussions of maybe the very beginning of the Ineos era. Maybe that Eric Ten Hag pre-season before, after the FA Cup, where they were seen to be canvassing Europe, basically, and that obviously didn't help. So maybe I'm not here to say the hierarchy are doing a great job, but think clearly they're learning from previous lessons of the
Yeah.
past.
Can I
So
just a couple of
yeah,
questions actually? So
yeah, of
one,
course.
you mentioned Tuchel and Ancelotti. I think definitely those two names were high up the list of a lot of fans. Probably the third one in that bracket of like elite managers is Luis Enrique, and I think over the last week there's been a lot of talk, tweets that he's speaking to the PSG hierarchy, but we've all seen rumors about Manchester United looking at him. So is there anything you can see happening there, or do you think it's unlikely?
Look, I'll be as honest as I know, right? I mean, he's been a name that I think has been linked with the club because of his contract situation, rather than Manchester United pursuing Luis Enrique. And I think those two things are very different. There's one thing to say, oh, if he became available in the summer, let's see what's possible. But look, it looks very likely he's going to renew at PSG, and I think with all of these things, especially from the media perspective, and when I'm trying to news gather and unravel kind of which stories are true and which
Yeah.
links there might be gas in, right?
Hmm.
Think people names they're linked because they want to improve their current situation, like in any
Yeah, yeah.
workplace, right? And I think that might be a Luis Enrique type situation rather than United, him being very high
Yeah.
on their list.
Fair enough. I think with what you say about Manchester United, the hierarchy waiting until the summer, that message has been consistent. Whoever you listen to is saying that, so it's clear the club are taking that approach. Me personally, I've always slightly questioned that approach because yes, I understand it. Give Carrick time. However, if you're going for the top managers around Europe, you know better than us how the industry works, right? Can you really get to July, August and then say who's around? The top clubs surely are working on the candidates early. So I think it's going to work out for the club because Carrick has done well. So, the outcome should be okay. But, switch it and say Carrick hadn't have worked out. The club now would be in a bit of a sticky position, right? So, like, how do you kind of see, that in
I
terms of
wonder,
how it's
just
working?
before I answer, if I asked each of you, who would you want? If you had any manager, who would you want?
I'll let Ron go first.
I said it when Ruben left, and obviously we had Carrick as the interim. My number one was Thomas Tuchel, and then obviously him extending his contract with England, which actually came as a surprise to me when the news broke, because I thought some of the rumours were sort of building up with Tuchel in United, and then I think maybe that's why England sort of jumped in, to secure him. So he would have been my number one pick. But beyond that, I mean, Ancelotti, I think, was a bit of a pipe dream. I think, he's in Brazil now. Would he really want to come back to Europe and, particularly at this juncture? I'm not quite sure. So I think it's just a lack of options, to be honest, out there. Enrique, I thought potentially as well, but I think you've just confirmed that that's probably unlikely at this stage. So Tuchel was number one, but if it's not Tuchel, then, with the way Carrick's going at the moment, I just can't see anyone else. Why would you look to repair something that isn't broken? So I'll just continue on with Michael for sure.
What about the you're wearing black and white stripes, Ron? There's another man that you've mentioned before.
I have. I did mention
Yeah.
Eddie. I did mention Eddie Howe. Yeah, that is for sure. I don't know. I feel like he needs maybe one more job until he sort of then climbs up again to this is me being a United fan. I'm gonna call it United level. I don't know. I just feel like there's probably another job in between Newcastle and Man United in terms of going for that absolute top job in the Premier League.
To
Yeah,
be fair, just anecdotally, I'm very surprised he hasn't been more linked with Manchester United. Just purely just from seeing every name, get like Andoni Areola and Oliver Glasner. He is a name that I'm quite surprised hasn't been more kind of hype behind, just because of what he's accomplished in the Premier League. Look, his transfer business is one question that will always get posed to him, but Manchester United made it quite clear that it's going to be a club strategy around signing. So to me, that's not even a consideration. But anyway,
yeah,
I agree with Ron though. I'm surprised. I would have thought, whether he's ready now or in the future. Problem is, he might not be available in the future if he's the England manager post
yeah.
Tuchel. Anyway,
It's true. Ash, remind me, who was your number one candidate?
I think it was Luis Enrique. Like as soon as Ruben was fired, obviously Carrick's in the door, and let's say even before the City game, it's like the dream. I think that was the word I said. Like the dream would be Luis Enrique. Obviously with what's happened, And there's still kind of like that doubt that people have got, probably all of us, right? It's like next season, fingers crossed, we got Champions League football. So that's 2 games a week. How does he handle squad rotation? There's, some question marks about substitutions. Are they too late? That was a criticism that he faced at Middlesbrough. So there's all these kind of like little nitpicking things that, fans are talking about. So I thought, and I think, Steve, you were similar in that you didn't mind the strategy of like, if Carlo was available and Carrick would be okay to do maybe 1 to 2 years like as the assistant, a bit like Louis van Gaal Giggs, and it was supposed to be a progressive thing where Giggs gets the job after Van Gaal, like with some certainty with Ancelotti and Carrick. Carrick gets the job in 2 years' time. The obvious question is, will Carrick want to do that? Who knows, right?
Which I remember at the time, I said no, he wouldn't. But then having thought about it, if the club came to him and said, we don't quite think you're ready this summer, but let's say Carlo Ancelotti is coming in and you can have the number 2 position, I can't see him turning that down. So when I think about it,
Ian spoke about it last week about Carrick as a personality. Let's be honest, Dan, you're there every week. He doesn't really like doing the press conferences. Like, he's just very level. But let's be honest, he wouldn't want to be there. He wants to be on the training pitch or going to see the youth team. So if Carlo was there, that's the personality, the charisma, maybe even the quotes that Dan is dying for because, Ruben's not there anymore. And then Carrick does all of the training stuff, gets to learn from a world-class manager about how to deal with players, squad rotation, all this stuff. That would be great. But yeah, I think, to be honest with you, that's a bit of a pipe dream. So I think realistically, for me, Carrick's in the hot seat, as providing, it doesn't tail off like Ollie, like when he went from temp to perm, or like finish 5th, and there's all of a sudden question marks. It's like, yes, we got Champions League, but we fell over the line. So
Carlo was my man. Do you remember, Ash? I said,
yeah.
And to be honest, if you offered me Carlo Ancelotti right now, I'd still take him over Carrick. As well as it's gone over the first couple of months, I just think, we saw it with Ollie as well. I'm not saying it would work out the same, but being interim and being the perm, the pressure is different. I think as soon as you become permanent manager, the media, the players,
next season, the expectations are gonna. You know what United fans are like. They're gonna be like, "Oh, who we signing? We got more money because we got champs and 2 games a week." And it's it's not Champions League like we
next
think.
season's different. Yeah.
The last time we were in the Champions League, like it was, the mini groups. Now it's this league format and all this stuff. So there's a lot of planning that United have got to do. So,
I just wonder.
Interesting.
Interested to take Dan's take on this. We mentioned Tuchel, we've mentioned Carlo, Luis Enrique, high-profile managers.
Yeah, we're shopping at the top table, lads.
Right, and Dan, you know this better than anyone. The last 10 years in terms of we've had Jose, we've had Louis van Gaal,
Yeah.
and I just wonder, your take on this is actually having a manager now in place that actually understands the club, has been around the Fergie era. Just knows what it takes, from day to day to try and get a tune out of the players, to manage the media, work with the likes of yourselves, and, ultimately just keep the club ticking. And it's all about the results. And yes, the sample size is very small. He's been in charge for the last, 2.5 months or so. But actually, how important is that to actually get, the nucleus of the club, which, clearly Carrick does?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few bits to unpack there. So I'll start with your question, Ron, to start with. Look, I think, and it kind of goes to what Ash was saying about, say, news conferences and, do we want someone who gives us a soundbite every week? I would kind of counter that. One aspect I would say is I feel, for Carrick in a way, because he is also being interviewed on the job, right? So I think there are some subjects, like when Sir Jim Radcliffe came out with the comments to Sky News, that he has to be really careful how he answers that. I mean, he's on a 6-month interview process where everything he says and does is going to be analyzed to a T. So I think you have to give him a bit of kind of leeway, I think a little bit in his news conferences. But actually, I find him fine, to be honest. I mean, we can talk about Ruben Amorim and how entertaining his news conferences were, but let's not forget, they were entertaining in a positive way. I mean, hearing him dig out a different player every week and talk about how, you know, Patrick Dorgu is extremely anxious on the
Yep,
ball,
I
or
remember
Lenny
that.
Yoro has a
Yeah.
crisis in
The
confidence on the
academy
bench
kids
after
he called out, right?
yeah, the academy kid. I
Yeah.
mean, let's also like not forget that sometimes it's not bad to have just a really stable type of manager or head coach where, and I've asked him, questions in the past, say about Kobe Mainoo or some of the players about England, rather than just saying, oh, it's not my problem. He gave enough where quite often, yes, sometimes we're all talking to ourselves going, that's the headline from that. But sometimes he just gives you enough, which is fine. So I think there's that part. But to go back to Ron's question, the reason I asked you what kind of manager you want or who you want is because I think what I've summarized there, and I think the feeling is there's not a lot of options out there.
Yeah.
And we're talking about Carlo Ancelotti, who, is towards the end of his managerial career, by the way, quite similar to Louis van Gaal in a sense, right? There aren't a lot of options. And as Ron alluded to, they've tried in the last two appointments, a younger up and coming European manager in Ruben Amorim and Eric Ten Hag. With Ollie, there's always the caveat when you talk about his kind of era that the last season was somewhat sabotaged by the signings of Ronaldo and Sancho. So look, maybe again, Carrick hasn't been appointed permanently yet. So I absolutely agree the next season will be different. I'm not comparing the Championship to Champions League football and Premier League football. But all I would say is he has experience playing 3 games a week, obviously as a player at Manchester United, but also in terms of a very congested fixture list. And remember that first season at Middlesbrough, like they were very good. I mean, I find it hilarious sometimes when we talk about, or I hear other people talk about the time at Middlesbrough. They sold his best player in Chuba Akpom. There is a reason why they didn't sustain success in the following seasons. They didn't invest in that team. I mean, I don't think anyone tipped them to be promotion, favourites in those next 2 seasons. So I think, but what I would say is, again, not to ask all of you again, but I find the Ollie argument very interesting as well. If Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was never the caretaker and then head coach of Manchester United, how would we, and the media, by the way, be talking about Michael Carrick? There would be no discussion. I mean, there wouldn't be. I mean, I am convinced we wouldn't be saying, actually, we need
That's
to be a
just a
bit
great
careful.
point.
Yeah,
That's a
fair.
great point.
Yeah.
Dan, on that point quickly, do you think that's because of then Ollie or the fact that Carrick was even associated with Ollie's backroom stuff? Do you think it's purely what happened with Ollie?
I've thought about this a lot. Maybe I don't have anything better to do in my life, but I've thought about this a lot, genuinely, because I do find it very fascinating. And to be honest, it's something I want to ask Michael Carrick in the next few weeks, because he does seem to get quite, not disrespected, but it's like he shouldn't get this job because he was part of Ollie's staff, but also they tried it with Ollie to be a caretaker and then take the club on. So to answer your question, I think it's a double-pronged thing, really, that it's easy. We have former players on Sky Sports News who say
I was
he
about
shouldn't
to
get
say
the
that.
job.
Yeah.
No, and look, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but
Mm.
I see former players come on and say he shouldn't get the job because of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Well, why? Like, what is, should Xavi not have got the job because Pep Guardiola was a manager of Barcelona? Like, I know it's very different, but I just, I find the two arguments very strange, because if we take where Manchester United were in January and how many points they were behind the likes of Aston Villa, okay, some teams have combusted a little bit, but this team weren't taking their chances. They were defensively extremely fragile. They weren't defending their box. Carrick and his backroom staff have fixed all of that. And again, the difference I would say in Solskjaer's era of that first period you were talking about, Ash, before he became permanent, were there weren't many performances, I don't think, that I remember. Even PSG, as iconic as those games were, or that night in Paris, I sort of hanging on in those games, quite often. And, that they were great performances, defensive rearguard, but they weren't playing great attacking football, dominating games, or you could see patterns of play. We're seeing that a little bit with this Carrick team.
I agree. Yeah.
That's the only caveat that I see are points of difference. So I think they are very different. And I think you also mentioned Ash's substitutes, by the way. I want to just touch on that really quick. I think what we've learned from Ruben Amorim, for all his faults, but also Michael Carrick, is there's not a lot of trust on that bench. Manuel Ugarte, Joshua Zirkzee don't come on, and they're fully fledged internationals. There's a reason why, Steve Holland and that, it's not just Carrick's decision, that whole backroom staff are deciding some of these players on the bench aren't warranting more than 10 minutes off the bench. So
Yeah.
I think, again, there's a reason I think he's not using a lot of those subs.
Do you know what? On that point, is I didn't understand I guess like the noise around Šeško about a month ago. When he was coming off the bench and scoring, because the way I saw it was Mbeumo was like wearing the opposition defense down. You bring on a fresh number 9, and to be fair to Carrick, the amount of points that Šeško has won for him, with a substitute, I didn't really understand the hostility. Probably more on social media about that. Why is Šeško not starting? And to your point, it's like he has a game plan. It's like wearing teams down, and then things open up in the last 20 to 30 minutes of games.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think there's a lot we don't know as well. I mean, I think it was quite interesting. Šeško was pulled out of international duty with Slovenia because Manchester United even admit to themselves he'd been managing a bit of a niggling injury. So we also don't know whether he was 100% match fit. That might be something, as one thing I've learned in this job is sometimes there's a lot more to the story. And maybe they decided 2-3 weeks ago, look, we're just going to get you to the international break and you're going to have 3 weeks off here. Get your body absolutely fit because this last stretch of the season, you're going to be hugely important. So we also don't know how much that injury was hampering him starting matches too. But Ash, I agree. And also, I think you have to look at the context around the conversations. Would we be talking about Šeško like that, or would there be a debate around him if he wasn't worth £65 million last summer? Probably not. If he was signed for Sonny Larman's type money, we'd be going, oh, he's had a great season. He's one of the signings above,
Yeah.
So, but actually his goal return is probably one of the best of the last however many strikers United have signed in the last 5, 6, 7 years, with still quite a big upside and potential, which is why United signed him. So
As I'm
look,
going to
he's still
say,
improving. But
if Ruben was there, I'm sorry, he wouldn't have done what he's done. So again, credit to Carrick for that reason. Kobe Mainoo run, he's been sensational, right?
Sensational. Yeah, I think credit as well to Carrick in terms of the learning. Like we saw it with Højlund and the pressure that they placed on a number 9 for Man United, being a very young striker. I mean, they've learned from that, right? Šeško, they haven't started him every single game. Dan and Ash, to your point, right? They've sort of phased him in and then allowed him to come in for 30 minutes, 35 minutes or so at the end of the matches, and finish the game off if you like. That pressure hasn't been there. A little bit different, of course, because we've got one game a week, and it will be no doubt different next season. Hopefully, back in the Champions League. But again, there's a learning there. I think that Carrick's taken to say, look, we're not going to put the pressure on Šeško in his first season. We're going to allow him and integrate him and phase him into the games slowly.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to wrap this Carrick section just by talking about, realistically. So, Dan, you've quite fairly asked us, ideal world, who would we pick as manager? We've given you the elite names, right? But realistically, Tuchel is out of the picture, you would think. Although if England have a bad World Cup, you never know. But, let's assume he's out of the picture. Ancelotti, I read 3-4 weeks ago he was close to signing. I've not seen it inked yet, but it feels like that's close. And then, Enrique, like you said, that might be more smoke and mirrors. So if you kind of take out that elite category, if you like, you've obviously got that next tier of manager. And there's a lot of names in that mix, Nagelsmann, Poch, De Zerbi, maybe not because it looks like he's going to Spurs. But, there's that lower bracket of manager. So I guess the question is, as Manchester United supporters, would we take Carrick over that next set of managers? So Ron, I'll come to you on that. If those 3 elite managers are out of the question, are you taking Carrick over the the next bunch of managers?
Yeah, 100%. As I say, I wouldn't try to fix something that's not broken. I also look at it from Ineos's point of view as well. I mean, can you imagine, if they went in and they replaced Carrick, and we come to October time next season, and all of a sudden, roles have reversed, and we're mid-table or we're struggling again. Can you imagine the pressure it would put on them? I just can't see them making a decision, anything but, if you like, than Michael Carrick. And I think I'm a firm believer, I alluded to it earlier, I think, when you're in a company or you're in a business and you understand the ways of working, you get the culture of the club, you understand the fan base, you know what it's like day in, day out because you've seen the success over many years under Fergie. I just think we've got a huge advantage with Carrick being there. I really do. I believe in that. So I wouldn't go for anyone else. I mean, Tuchel was probably my number one pick.
Yeah.
But having seen what I've seen from Carrick, I just wouldn't change, not at all.